Hello, I'm Jacob Young from the University of Otago in New Zealand, and I'm going to be talking about work I did at Victoria University of Wellington, along with my co-authors Jennifer Ferreira and Nadia Pantiti. So interviews are a great way to get feedback about an experience we're trying to evaluate, whether that's interface with design, a virtual reality experience. Because unlike questionnaires, it allows the participants to give free feedback about the thing they've just evaluated for us, essentially. They're not bound by giving numerical feedback, like with a Likert scale. It's just they're free and honest thoughts. But for virtual realities in particular, where we've put them into a virtual world, should we be taking them out of that and back into the real world when we conduct these interviews? Is that going to affect the accuracy of our data at all? So the first issue is that our memories aren't always, particularly great. So if we're taking the participant out of virtual reality before we interview them, we're relying on their memory of the experience, which won't always match reality. And the other issue is that, especially for things like graphics, there's going to be inevitable and probably unfavorable comparisons to the real world. The other main issue is that when you take the headset off, there's the potential for there to be a break in presence. So when you first take your headset off after wearing it for a while, sometimes you're going to be a bit disoriented for a while. And it's been shown that that can cause a reduction in body ownership and can also actually result in less consistent data. So people have looked into how we can mitigate this for questionnaires. So there's been a few attempts, like the one on the right there you can see, to actually integrate questionnaires into the immersive experience being evaluated. So in this case, the researchers developed a bow and arrow game, and then to get feedback about it, instead of taking them out of the experience, they keep them in there, and then they've actually integrated the data gathering phase into the game itself. So they shoot the answers they want with the bow and arrow, which they're already acquainted to at this point with the game. And there's some evidence that this could potentially remove the break in presence experience between the experience and the evaluation of it, and can result in less variance in the results as a consequence of this. The other issue is that if we're talking face to face with someone, is their feedback going to be reliable? So ideally, when we're evaluating experience, we want honest feedback from the participant, but as we might know, that's not always necessarily the case. So talking face to face with someone, there's going to be some social pressure not to hurt their feelings, essentially. So if you say something bad about the experience and you can see that they're visibly hurt by that, are you going to backpedal and say good things about it essentially afterwards, to try and mitigate that? So again, we've seen in recent research people using virtual reality or virtual avatars to do these kinds of interviews, especially for things like clinical interviews and therapy, where there might be some more social pressures. People might feel a bit reluctant to share personal information about themselves, but we've seen that people are actually more likely to share sensitive information with an avatar, even if that avatar is human controlled, than they would with another human, possibly because those social pressures have been removed. Which raises the question, can we do these kinds of qualitative interviews inside of virtual reality itself, inside of the experience we were evaluating? And how is that going to affect the experience and the data that we get? So I was interested in four things in particular. So will conducting an interview inside of virtual reality affect the spatial presence that participants report feeling? Will there be an effect on the rapport between the participant and the interviewer? So that's how friendly they are with each other, how easy they find it to talk to each other. Will there be an effect on psychological involvement, which is the mutual emotional effect? So, will the participants' emotions affect the interviewer if they can no longer see them, if they have the headset on? And, kind of related to those last 2 points, if participants are still in the game and they can't see the interviewer, there's no psychological involvement with them, will they be more likely to report, negativity about the experience? So I wanted to investigate this. So I developed a game, and I put up posters around the university and, the surroundings, and said, I've made a game, come and evaluate it for me. I just want some feedback. So this was the game. It's a fairly simple affair. There's some aliens and you shoot them. So you just do this for about 2 minutes. Yeah, so as you can probably see, the game's not very good, and that was on purpose. So I added a bunch of things that people might want to complain about. So for example, enemies would always miss you. They're specifically programmed to shoot in a radius around you. There's not a lot of enemies. There's no real tension. There's no goals. There's no story. The graphics were visually inconsistent. They were just assets taken off the Unity store. There's really obnoxious music playing the whole time. It's a really loud dubstep track. The the scoring system makes no sense because it's literally just a random number generator. Every time you hit an alien, you can potentially lose points, and it might randomly report you've got a headshot or something. And the thing that people picked up on a lot is you've got two controllers, but you've only got one gun, so one of your hands is just sitting there the whole time. So I made a bet on purpose to see if people would actually tell me all the bad things about the game if I interviewed them afterwards, after they played it. So yeah, people would play the game, would sit them down for an interview and ask them how the experience was and specific questions about the gameplay and the audio, etc. And then we'd sit them down and have them do a questionnaire so we could get quantitative data as well to see if that was affected by the way we did the interview. So we had three different conditions. We had three different ways we did the interview. So we had the usual face-to-face interview where they take the headset off and they sit down with the interviewer and have a face-to-face conversation. And then we thought about two different ways that we could do the interview while the participant stayed within virtual reality. So the first of these, so the participant just keeps the headset on and the interviewer is sitting in the room with them and they just have the usual conversation, but now the participant can't see the interviewer, but they can see the game that they're talking about. And the second way we thought about was that we have both the participant and the interviewer inside of virtual reality. They're in separate rooms in this case. And then we have both of them show up in the game as a little character that's kind of blending in, and they do the whole conversation within virtual reality. So there's an audio link. They're in separate rooms. So we need the audio link. We can see their basic body language. So little green robot guy would just pop up after the game finished and just do the interview that way. So what did we find? First of all, we didn't actually find a difference in spatial presence between the conditions. So this was the IPQ reported in the questionnaire after the interview. Yeah, so we didn't find any difference there, but what we did find was that participants that reported experiencing higher spatial presence actually rated the game higher. Not sure which way the causality is with that. If you're more present, are you having a better time? Or if you're having a better time, are you more likely to kind of immerse yourself in the game? Rapport between the participant and the interviewer was actually also, we didn't find any differences between conditions, which was kind of surprising for us. We assumed that if you can't see the other person, as we've seen with other literature on co-presence, etc., if you can't see someone else's body language and their facial expressions, that kind of thing, we would have expected to see more rapport. But that wasn't reflected in our results. But again, what we found was that if participants that experienced more rapport with the interviewer actually tended to rate the game higher. So there was an effect there where, potentially if they experienced more rapport with the interviewer, they would want to, give them a good result. One place we did find a significant difference was with the psychological involvement. So as I was saying before, just in the immersed condition in particular, which is the one where they had the headset on and couldn't see the interviewer at all, there was no little robot guy. We actually, the participants actually experienced significantly less psychological involvement with the interviewer. And that's possibly due to what I was saying before with, you can't see the other person's body language and their facial expressions. So it becomes a bit harder to gauge their emotions and have their emotions affect you. But in this case, it was actually the opposite way to what we expected. So it was, if they couldn't see the interviewer, they perceived the interviewer as less capable of empathy, essentially, but they felt that the interviewer wasn't responding to the participants' emotions, which was quite surprising. We also took the interviews and transcribed them, and we were interested in seeing how much positive and negative feedback participants were giving across the conditions. So there was no perfect way to do this. What we ended up doing was we took the transcripts and line by line we fed them into center strength, which will give you a positive and negative score based on text snippets you give it, and we evaluated the transcripts that way. And once again, we didn't find any difference between the conditions based on the center strength scores. So people weren't particularly positive about the game or particularly negative about it in each condition. But what we found was that actually center strength has some limitations when it comes to violent content. So any line with the word gun in it would just automatically be flagged as a negative comment. Even if someone said, I really like the gun, or the gun was really fun to shoot, that would automatically be a negative comment, just because it has the word gun in it. We also didn't find any differences in how well the game was rated in the questionnaire. So we asked them on a scale from 1 to 7, how did you think the game was, how were the graphics, the audio, and the gameplay? And we didn't find any differences between conditions. But what we did find, and also in the interview comments, the game was bad. So some of the participants weren't really that afraid to just tell us that the game wasn't very good. They were quite forthcoming with their criticism. But also some people just straight up told us that they wanted to badmouth the game essentially, but they didn't feel comfortable doing so. So there were potentially some social pressures in play where participants weren't comfortable telling us that the game wasn't very good, essentially. Another thing we found that wasn't in our initial research questions, but it's just a nice little validation of probably what I would expect. But participants that knew the interviewer, in this case it was Nadia Pen, people that knew her beforehand were more likely to rate the game higher in the questionnaire, even though the questionnaire was anonymous and we don't know who wrote what, but people still felt compelled to rate the game higher if they knew Nadia beforehand because they probably wanted to, make her happy. And we had the same with the spatial presence. So people actually rated their spatial presence and the IPQ higher if they knew Nadia beforehand, which is unsurprising, but it's good to have that confirmed. So we didn't really see a lot of differences in our results. So we might be thinking that, why would we bother with virtual interviews, right? Face-to-face is apparently fine, and we actually experienced a few downsides. So a lot of people didn't actually realize that the interview had started when the little robot spawned. Even though I warned them, game's over, someone's about to come in and talk to you in the game, you'll see a little robot guy, but they just assumed it was another NPC, so people didn't know how to respond. Nadia started talking to them, and they just kind of stood around, they didn't really know what's going on. And then what we saw actually a few times, which is, where we got the name of the paper from, is people started shooting Nadia because they thought, she's just a new enemy or something. Or even after she started talking, they just tried to shoot her. And someone even did that, like 2 minutes into the interview when it was very clear it was a person on the other end. So there's potentially a dehumanizing effect for the interviewer, which could be desirable or undesirable depending on the nature of the experience you're evaluating. And as we saw with psychological involvement, this abstract avatar we have, this little robot guy, made gauging emotional responses difficult, which again, it could be desirable based depending on what you're actually evaluating. So for things like, clinical interviews, therapy, that kind of thing, where we want to be impartial, it might actually be beneficial to have an abstract avatar where, that might help the participant or the patient feel like they're not being judged about what they're saying. We also saw a few upsides, essentially, to doing it this way. So the main thing we saw was that participants were still seeing what they were talking about, essentially. So in the face-to-face condition, where we took the headset off, people would talk about, vague concepts like, I can't remember what the gun looks like, but it was pretty good, I think. And they couldn't remember how many aliens were coming or what they looked like. But then when we had them actually keep the headset on, like in the immersed in avatar conditions, they were still looking at what they were talking about, and they're making a lot more didactic references about that. So they'd point to specific objects and say, I quite like how that looked, or I wish I could run over there or something, right? So you get much more, I guess, accurate and targeted feedback about what you're trying to evaluate. And that could be quite a good thing, depending on the context. A little bit unscientific, but a lot of the participants actually really enjoyed the experience as well. So, specifically in the avatar condition, they enjoyed the idea of having someone to talk to in a virtual environment, and they just thought it was a very cool way to do the interview. So that was essentially me. So that's the references I used if you want to pause the video here. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching.